Audrey here. I'm excited to bring y'all today's video. So first and foremost, I want to thank Exo Terra. They were kind enough to send me some of their new Frogs & Company products for free to try out. So I am particularly excited to do this build in their brand new dart frog terrarium. But before we get into that, I wanted to kind of show off the tank, what's different about it, and some of the really neat features that it has for us froggers. So if you've kept dart frogs or tree frogs, you know that there's not really any good tanks on the market that are, affordable to just a beginner starting out, that don't really need any modifications to them. And so Exo Terra was kind enough to come up with these new frog tanks. And so what we have here, first and foremost, is the modified lid. So I like to say it's very Tesla style, very sleek, smooth. And so we have half of a screen top, and then to keep the humidity in that these guys need, they did add a glass panel to it along with a single push button, and then the entire lid comes off from these back two notches. And Ryder has come to join us and give us his review as well. And they got rid of the little swivel latches and just added this one push button, which I really like. Second thing, it's a little bit more difficult to see, but they modified the back ports as well. So they have these little rubber notches that will secure any cording or misting system tubing, and then integrated into the top rim, they also have perfectly sized little slots for the tubes to go in. They modified the door. So if you're familiar with the Exo Terra products, you know they always have the double doors on there. Now for optimal viewing, they have just the single door on here. Let me get this tape off. And they modified the ventilation on here as well, so it's very minimized to prevent microfeeder escapage. So especially if you keep, micro geckos and dart frogs, you're probably used to your fruit flies in particular getting out. So what they did is both along the top, they kind of decreased the size of the gap with the ventilation up here. And so they really decreased the gap, along the door as well. And so now we'll get to my favorite part. The door does have a different mechanism, little push button, the latch pops up and it swings open. So that's really snazzy, I like that. And then you probably can't really pick it up super great, but it does have the hole drilled in already. Hello, Lily. Now she's come to join us well. All right, y'all, this is my first voiceover ever, so please bear with me. We'll get through this together. But here I am just inserting the tubing into the included bulkhead that comes with the Exo Terra Frogs & Company tanks. I personally like to attach the tubing to the bottom part first and then attach it to a little strainer that is seated inside of the enclosure. I think it's just easier to attach that tubing first rather than, trying to get it on there after it's already set up. So that is just what I'm doing here. And then now, prior to water checking the tank, I'm just attaching that gate valve to the very end to make sure it is secure. And pro tip, always water check your tanks. Even if you don't plan on having a water feature or anything in there, especially with a high humidity species like a dart frog, this makes draining any excess water out very easy. And now we are getting into making that custom background. So I like to use either the Great Stuff Pond and Foam, but my local Lowe's did not have that in stock. So my second favorite one to use is the Windows Cracks and Gaps. They do all work a little bit different as far as the expansion. And so for that reason, I choose the window one over like the standard or any of the other ones. And here we are, almost done with the background. And now after that has cured, I like to set the tank on its side. Whatever side I'm working on, I like to have laying flat on the ground. And now after it is cured, I am carving the background. I like to personally use my Dremel 4000 with the flexible shaft attachment. And the coarser the sanding bit, the faster this process will go. And then after I finish the background, I personally also like to use a heat gun to help kind of seal it. That'll help, secure any holes that show up in the background and may peek through some dry lock, but definitely do it outside. And now, because it does make a huge mess, I am just cleaning up. And after I played around with hardscape, this is what I got with this ghost wood. And now I'm just securing the anchor points to the background with some more great stuff. Alright y'all, and now after that has cured, I like to let it sit at least 12 hours. I'll go in and trim off those points that were added to the background to secure the hardscape with my hands. And after they're roughly cut up, I'll go back in with that Dremel shaft attachment and sand them up, make them nice and smooth. And now an important part of securing your background and making sure it lasts and keeps all your little inhabitants safe is securing the perimeter of the background. So basically all of the edges to the glass with an aquarium safe silicone. I personally like to use the clear ASI. And I'm just gonna show y'all this one side, but I do it around the top, both sides, and the bottom. And you'll apply a thin bead, and then using a preferably gloved finger, you just want to smooth it down and make sure you form a nice attachment. All right, and now I am going to do a dry lock background made famous by my buddy Troy Goldberg. If y'all haven't checked out his channel, make sure and do it. He's got some great stuff on there. But I mixed the dry lock. I personally always like to do 3 different containers. So I'll put more dry lock in and make kind of a nice medium grade, brown. And that's what I like to use for my backgrounds as the bulk of the cover. And then I'll mix a lighter brown and then a darker, really dark brown, almost blackish one. And I'll show y'all how I go in and kind of highlight and shade after doing the initial coating. And now once you have your pigments mixed up how you want, I recommend, rather than investing in good brushes, just invest in a larger bag of kind of crappy quality brushes. They're gonna get messed up. You're not really gonna get a whole lot of use out of them for multiple times. So you're better off just getting a big variety pack. And so with that mid-shade brown that I mixed up, I'm gonna go over the entire background with that. Kind of a nice stippling, dabbing effect to make sure it sinks into any little creases, holes, anything like that. And you don't have to be super clean or precise with this. Fortunately, it does come off easily with a razor. And now what you'll see me doing is going in with the darker shade that I mixed and just stippling that all over, adding some nice shading effect in there. And then after this is dried, I go in with the lightest shade and do the same thing. And that just makes it look more naturalistic, in my opinion. And now our background is complete, so I have moved inside. I use a couple different razors. I really like this little long arm razor. It gets up nice and tight places that you might not otherwise be able to get into. Yeah, I know, that's what she said. But I'm just cleaning up the sides. And anything that drips down on the bottom, don't worry about that. You can easily scrape that off with a razor as well after everything is nice and dry. And I am just doing some little touch-ups here. So, don't be afraid if it's not automatically perfect. It's a work of art. And now this is one of my favorite little pro tips. I never really see anybody else doing this, so I don't know if it's just for lack of knowing. But once again, going back to my handy dandy Dremel, you're almost always going to get some dry lock on, any of your hardscape that you affix to the background. Once again, no need to fear about that. You take your handy dandy Dremel with a sanding barrel attachment, and it will quickly sand off any dry lock or quickcrete stain that you get on your hardscape. And now I am just thoroughly misting it down. One thing I should mention I did not film is after your background is set with the quickcrete and it is dry, you want to thoroughly wash that background off and let it dry. This is me just misting it again after taking that sander in there and getting any of the wood, out of the bottom, out of the sides of the tank, that kind of thing. And now I am officially attaching the bulkhead and the tubing in here. So y'all saw me do that before when I was water checking the base, which the tank passed. Yay, always a good thing. But you obviously want to apply your bulkhead in there before you start building out your tank. Otherwise, you're gonna have a heck of a time doing it after your substrate and false bottom is in there. But you can see, nice and installed. So now we're ready to actually build this. Another little pro tip I like is, you can use the just aluminum window screen from your local hardware store as a substrate barrier. That's what I do. And I am also a sewer, so I have a rotary mat, a cutter, and a ruler, and it is great for cutting this substrate barrier. You can get really nice and precise cuts really quickly and easily. And you'll see me use some vinyl on the side of the tank as well. And this is the same technique that I use for cutting that vinyl that I apply to hide the ugly foam and silicone and whatnot. So now we're ready to start adding our substrate layer. So I am just using the expanded clay balls or Leka for my false bottom. Doesn't need to be super duper deep because we do have that bulkhead in there, but I still like to make it at least a couple inches. And now it's time to add our substrate barrier in there. So you can see my hardscape does go to the base of the tank. So right here, I'm just getting a rough idea of where I need to cut the barrier, which is kind of right down the middle in this case. And what this does is this will allow me to slip it through, and then you can't really see it on camera, but right behind the hardscape, since that did take up some additional space, I have a little spare piece of screen that I cut to just cover that gap and ensure that no substrate seeps through. And now it's finally time to add our substrate. So I make up my own ABG mix. There's plenty of recipes online. You can choose whichever one you prefer. But I've been using this particular recipe for years and in several of my enclosures, so it works for me. And Exo Terra also sent me some of their new substratum to try out. And this stuff is really cool. So it is sustainably harvested from, I believe it's pronounced Mount Oso volcano in Japan. And you don't want to rinse this substrate before using it. It may come across a little bit damp, and it does have some good beneficial bacteria in there.
And so you don't want to rinse that away, but I'm just adding a bag of that to mix in to help supplement the substrate, and just mix it in thoroughly with my ABG. And now the fun part, my favorite part, short of adding the inhabitants, is the planting. So I love bromeliads. They are fantastic. You cannot change my mind on that. I do a lot of bromeliad propagation, and so I have some Freesia racenae, a Freesia fenestralis, and a Freesia soundersi. I know, I probably butchered some of those names, but they're spelled out for you, so you can look them up. I like the Freesias a lot. They're definitely not as popular as the Neorogelias, but I think they're really beautiful, and the particular varieties I use do stay on the smaller side, so hopefully it won't outgrow this enclosure. So right now I am using some Begonia thelmae in here. I have a couple cuttings of those. They're nice little trailers. They'll grow up the background, that kind of thing. Just kind of playing around with placement, seeing what I like. Of course, have to add a Macotes petola in there. And now I am adding an Alocasia maharani, or they're also known as the gray dragon. It is a jewel alocasia. I love alocasias. This is definitely one of my favorite species. And the reason I went with this one in here is it is a dwarf variety. So these guys tend to max out around 12 inches tall. So I don't anticipate this guy outgrowing this enclosure, unlike some of the other alocasia varieties. So I am happy with the placement of the plants, so now it's time to actually start planting them. And with any of my jewel orchids, I always surround the base with some damp sphagnum moss. And you'll see me do that with the begonia and the bromeliads as well. And I did admittedly go a little heavy with the bromeliads in here, and that is due to the species of inhabitants that will be living in this tank. And if you want to find out what that is, you will have to stay tuned. And so for that begonia up top, I am just packing some damp sphagnum moss up there. And then I will affix it to the background, make sure it's nice and snug with some toothpicks. And same thing down here. And now to make sure these bromeliads get nice and secure in the hardscape, I'm just taking some super glue and attaching it to the hardscape, and then I will gently put the bromeliads in there. And I've been propagating this dude for a while. He's got a couple little pups coming off. So with that in mind, I make sure and put the pups in the back so they're not crushed against the wood. So now I'm just adding some small live oak leaf litter, and I'll mix this in with the substrate a little bit, and that ensures that there will be plenty of nutrition for my microfauna cleanup crew, tank janitors, whatever you want to call them. And now one of my favorite parts is the moss. So I get moss from a couple different sources, and this is just some nice lush pillow moss that I'm adding in here. And then I'll also be adding an assortment of moss covered branches and some other moss into the substrate that is sustainably harvested from a friend in the Pacific Northwest. And that would be one of my parrots. So if y'all are ever watching a video and hear some strange background noises, just keep in mind I have 5 parrots. It is most likely one, if not several of them. Alright, and now I absolutely love these moss covered branches, and I like to accent with those. And so I'm just testing out some placement, and then once again I will use some super glue and just affix them to the background and the hardscape. And now it's time to add the microfauna. So I culture these myself. I personally like to add in dwarf white ice pods in my dark frog enclosures, and a heaping pile of some tropical springtails. And I like to add in some charcoal from the master cultures as well. So I'll just dig little holes in random places in the substrate and bury it for my springtails. And here you can see a close-up. I'm just getting some charcoal off my beautiful moss. Here are our little tank janitors. So now I'm just adding my top layer of leaf litter. I like to use both a thin cuticle and a thick cuticle leaf to get several different breakdown times. So I'm just adding some live oak leaf litter on top. And that is my thin cuticle stuff that'll break down faster. And now this is some of my absolute favorite leaf litter from Alex at Frog Daddy. This is the micro sea grape. Y'all, you should definitely check this stuff out. His leaf litter is primo. It is beautiful, it's small so you don't have to break it up like the bigger sea grape, and it honestly smells really good. And I just love the aesthetic that it adds to the tank. Alright guys, so we have finally come to lighting time. And Exo Terra also graciously gave me one of their brand new Terra Sky LED fixtures. So I've seen these in action. They have some really cool features that I think y'all will like. But I'm gonna go ahead and unbox this, kind of go over it with y'all. And this is the light that we're gonna try out on this bad boy. So there's a couple of things that you'll notice about this light. It is designed to perfectly fit over their brand new Frogs & Company tanks, though it does have extendable arms as well. Comes with a remote. I'll show you why once we get it set up. And you'll see it has this little red diode looking attachment to it. So this is what you need to mount somewhere on your tank where it is easily reachable by the remote. So you don't want to put it like on the back of your tank because then your remote's not going to sync to it super great. But I'm going to show y'all how to set this up, and then the exciting part, show y'all some cool features with the new Terra Sky. So it has these little grooves that fit perfectly over here, and you can see you can actually slide the light around once it is secure in there. So I'm just going to center it. This I'm going to attach on the side. Actually, yeah, I'll do this side. It'll still be easily accessible where I plan on putting it. If you do put it on the lid, just make sure you can still take the lid off. So it had this white box in here
And this is actually your power supply. So what I'm gonna do, plug it in from the light to your power supply. Now I'm gonna plug this into my outlet. And we're cooking. So now this is the really cool part. This handy dandy little remote has a little pull tab you need to pull out. This thing is really customizable. And so it has an on-off switch. And like I said, you want to make sure you can point it at the little attachment here. Just to show again, on and off. So right now we just kind of have a basic white light. All right, so now let's play around with some of these little features here. You can see I have it set on the blue right now, but you can change it. Just make sure and point at your little diode. So now we have the red, purple, yellow, and a darker blue. You can use the plus or minus buttons on here to cycle through the intensity of the lights as well. And what I really like about this is these buttons here. So I'm going to show y'all what these do. So we have a nice moonlight glow. You can see it is simulating more of a full moon effect. And these are definitely my favorite. These storm settings. So these are really cool. There's 3 different ones. So you can add more intense lightning in there. Or you can have a nice bright storm. And this one has less lightning in it, but still really cool. You can also do 4 different presets on here. So there's P1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you customize the lights to the intensity you like, rather than having to alter it all the time, you can just set it to one of those 4 presets and make it nice and quick and easy. But I do think this is a really cool, innovative light for the frog community for sure. All right, now I am applying what is called wood contact paper. You can actually get this on Amazon. A lot of people do different vinyls. I've tried several different ones. This is my personal favorite one. And you just cut it to size to the longest width of the background on the sides. And I promise I'm not talking to myself here. For some reason the audio got messed up, and so now I'm just doing a voiceover to explain what I'm doing. And I like this because it does have like a parchment paper background and you don't need water to apply it. So it does have a nice sticky coating on it. And I'm just using an old ID to kind of squeegee it down and make sure we don't trap any air bubbles in there. But I really love the way this contact paper looks. Like I said, you can get it on Amazon. It is called wood contact paper. And once you've got it securely affixed to the glass, I just take my ID at the bottom rim and make sure it's nice and snug. And now I'll take a box cutter and trim off any excess. You do not need to use a lot of pressure on this product. And now, because I don't have just a straight edge, what I'll do is I'll take that same box cutter and kind of estimate where I need to start the cut on the outside. And the camera doesn't really pick it up super great, but in person you can easily see the line from the inside and just make your cut accordingly. And once you have finished that cut, just peel away the excess and you get a nice, clean, beautiful border on there.
Alright y'all, that brings us to the conclusion in our Exo Terra Frogs Co Dart Frog Terrarium build. I hope y'all have enjoyed following me along on this journey, maybe picked up a few tips and tricks to help you along the way with yours. And I'd once again like to thank Exo Terra for their partnership with me in doing this video. These tanks are really awesome. I'm enjoying working with them, and I think they're especially a really great option for beginners to not have to modify a tank. You can kind of just jump right in and make a really awesome home for your dart frogs or your tree frogs or even your tropical geckos. But if you want to see who is going to call this beautiful enclosure home, make sure and subscribe and hit that bell notification, because I'm going to let this tank sit and let the microfauna populations boom in here for a few weeks before I move the new babies in here. I say new, actually some of the oldest dart frogs in my collection, and you're not supposed to have favorites, but I have to admit they are my favorites. Y'all definitely don't want to miss me releasing them in here. It's gonna be awesome. Y'all take care, have a great one. Thanks for watching.